Hello, it's Andrew. Welcome to Collaborative Learning. Today's special is the rise and fall of the German army on the East and West fronts, part 1. If you like my work, please give me a like, subscribe to this channel, check the playlists, and support me on Patreon and PayPal. Additional links and information can be found in the description box below. In this special, we focus on the combat dynamics against the Soviets and the Western Allies. There will be an emphasis on the decline of German combined arms warfare and the rise of the Red Army. The majority of Germany's Panzer Divisions fought against the Soviets, and a whopping 80% of German casualties in World War II were lost in this theater of war. Understanding their rise and fall in the East is the key to understanding why German offensive power collapsed on all fronts in 1944. When the offensive power is lost, the war is lost as well. It is my intent to summarize the military situation as a gateway to show you many of the best books and sources in the sidebar. Now on to some background. In my review of the Blitzkrieg Legend, we talk about the myths and ultimate realities of successful German military innovation in offensive operations. This created a ground force that outperformed global expectations, to the point where the Germans were able to overrun much of Europe with a superior level of organizational skill. At the same time, German political and military leaders acted with hubris and started assigning the army with political objectives that were far beyond their capabilities. However, despite all these strategic failures, the tactical performance of the German army remained good, and they inflicted horrific losses on their opponents. In 1941, Operation Barbarossa, we can see the German army and its Axis allies fire on all cylinders. It was the best version of the German military that fought in the war. It was a ground force with peak training, mobility, and logistics, supported by a bloodied but still strong air force. Panzer and Infantry divisions were the most combat experienced and capable force in the world, and had undergone tactical and organizational improvements after every campaign. On top of that, the German infantry divisions raided occupied Europe for supplies and mobility assets. In the complex area of supply chain management, they were also highly experienced in managing railroads, traffic control, setting up bases, combat engineering, maintenance, and supply delivery with food, fodder, fuel, and ammunition. They would be able to supply the Axis forces with offensive-grade support until the fall of 1941. The German infantry forces was also the strongest of the whole war. The German infantry division had 9 strong battalions of trained and often experienced infantry available for the attack, with a strategic manpower reserve that would last them until the fall of 1941. This would sustain their frontline field forces. As Red Army expert David Glantz argues in his book Stumbling Colossus, the Red Army was a completely different beast. It was a gigantic, combat ineffective army, and halfway in the process of major military expansion and reform. It was being broken up and reorganized, with the completion date being the middle of 1942. The army had expanded far beyond the size of its professional leadership cadre. There was widespread incompetence, as much as the officer corps were young and inexperienced men that were only half-trained. The Red Army's most experienced leadership was purged by Stalin, leading to the loss of tens of thousands of his top personnel, many of them generals and colonels. Its armored forces, the mechanized corps, were largely half-developed and functionally non-operational. A critical problem with the Red Army was its underdeveloped command and control system and lack of radios, which was the product of the Soviet Union's inadequate electronics industry. This weakness was oddly matched with a strong heavy industry, capable of endlessly reinforcing an army that had the most artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, and tanks in the world. But at the same time, this army lacked the electronics and the communications to put these weapons into their most productive use. The Soviet Air Force was also hampered by these shortfalls, along with an overexpansion and lack of training. The Soviet Union's weakness in electronics was matched with the Soviet Union's mediocre chemical industry, which 2/3 were located in the Ukraine. The chemical industry was vital for artillery ammunition production and was too small for the Red Army's excessive number of artillery tubes. The mediocre ammunition supply did not provide the Red Army with any appreciable advantage over Axis forces with their superior quality artillery specialists and units. The Germans, in terms of effective firepower, were superior in both air and on the ground. The Red Army also suffered from uncoordinated anti-tank power. While the Red Army had an enormous number of tanks and anti-tank weapons, they did not know how to organize these resources effectively and seal off the 2,900-kilometer front. With such an enormous front line, the German panzer forces could always find a nice weak spot and break through. In Operation Barbarossa, Axis ground forces performed as two armies. There was a fast-moving, armored and motorized force combined with a much larger but slower-moving horse-drawn infantry force. The fast-moving Panzer Divisions would be massed together into huge panzer groups and be the first to encircle Soviet armies. Meanwhile, the slower, partially motorized horse-drawn infantry divisions would come in as a second wave to destroy them directly and collect hundreds of thousands of prisoners. At the divisional level, the German divisions proved to be tactically superior to the Soviet divisions. The Panzer Divisions cut through the Soviet front typically without much difficulty and charged into the depths far into the Soviet rear. The German infantry divisions had stronger and more effective artillery fire. They combined this with the effects of air support and skillful ground combat with their infantry and combat engineers. The German infantry outperformed their enemy and frequently performed tactical encirclement maneuvers on them, inflicting highly disproportionate human and material losses. A good tactical performance could not make up for delusional and poor strategy. We all know what happened. The German army overestimated its capability. The Axis timetable was wrecked at the Battle of Smolensk that summer. General Zhukov ruthlessly pushed his infantry and tank units forward, fixing German forces down in defense. German forces were forced to consume their supplies, defending and not pushing towards Moscow. Despite achieving the largest encirclement victories in world history, in the subsequent Operation Typhoon, the German army was finally weakened by attrition. It ran out of steam in front of Moscow in November 1941. Axis soldiers got bogged down fighting for their lives against the Soviet winter counteroffensive, which introduced new armies into the battlefield and stopped them. The German army and air force never recovered from the campaigns of 1941. The combined losses of the Battle of Britain and air war in Barbarossa resulted in serious losses of professional pilots. The powerful German army that had used Europe as a real-world training ground for Barbarossa had sustained heavy losses in men and materiel. Much of their horses and vehicles were lost, and they will never be as mobile ever again. Typical human loss rate for German divisions by the end of the year was over 6,000 men. In total, around 900,000 Germans were casualties of war. What was more critical than this figure was that they contained many losses of irreplaceable pre-war professional officers and NCOs, which were the heart of the army. Highly educated and trained professionals and specialists had served since 1920s and 1930s, did not grow on trees. Besides the loss of a wide array of military expertise, the high German fighting morale suffered an incredible blow that it never really recovered from in World War II. Their self-confidence and fighting spirit would decline as the war went on, and they would never be capable of the same feats ever again. This ends part 1. In part 2, I will discuss the condition of the Soviet Red Army after the Battle of Moscow, and move into the 1942 campaigns in Soviet Russia. See you there. Please put your thoughts and ideas in the comment section. They always make a great conversation. I hope you find the special to be informative. Thanks for watching.